Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I'm your host Eric Smith, and I just finished reading The Troop by Nick Cutter. It's a novel of terror, and it was published by Gallery Books in 2014, and this is what I feel like talking about. As I said, I just finished it, and The Troop, of the title, is a group of scouts from a small town. The group consists of Kent, Max, Ephraim, Newton, Shelley, and Scoutmaster Tim. And they've gone to Falstaff Island for a weekend getaway. I think they spend like 3 days there doing scouty things. But those scouty things go awry when Tom Paget shows up. And Tom will become known in legend as the Hungry Man. And we're introduced to him at the very beginning of the book, and he's escaped from a secret facility, and he's on the run trying to get away from somebody or something. And he steals a boat and he goes out to Falstaff Island, and Scoutmaster Tim is a doctor, and he sees Tom Paget, realizes he's sick, and feels it's his duty to try to help him, which really seems to be the wrong thing to do, considering that there is something came to the island with Tom, and it's going to get loose and set upon the troop. And there's your setup for the story. Now, first of all, when I was a kid, I was in Explorers, I was a Cub Scout, I was a Boy Scout, I was in Indian Guides, and in all of those organizations, nothing as horrible and terrifying as the events of this book ever happened to me. The potentially most scary thing that ever happened was we almost got trapped in the Rocky Mountains because of a storm, but we just paid attention to the weather and we left the mountains before the storm arrived. Now, we did end up eating Danny Johnson, just as a precautionary measure. And this was long before the internet and GPS, so we had no way of knowing there was a McDonald's 2 blocks away. You know, we thought it was the best thing to do. Poor Danny Johnson, but the rest of us survived. But that's nothing compared to what goes on in this book. Excuse me. Now, Nick Cutter is a pseudonym, one of many for this particular author. I'm not sure what his real name is. That's not true. It's right here on the copyright page. At least I assume the name on the copyright page is his real name. But I have read a number of things by this author under a number of other names, and I've really enjoyed all of them, and this was no exception. Just a fantastically written story, and the way it's told is really nice. He uses this device where the story is interspersed with newspaper articles, interviews, papers, journal entries, I suppose, from some of the kids from before the events when they were seeing a therapist, as well as formal inquiry testimony. And the really cool thing about this, at least the way he does it, is that it gives us hints of what's going to happen, because what we're reading is from after the events of Falstaff Island. So, we're reading about Falstaff Island, and then we get a little piece that's from after those events, and we're like, oh crap, that can't be good if they're talking about this. And then we go back to Falstaff Island and what's going on. And the author does acknowledge that he took this from Carrie by Stephen King. He thought it was a great device, and so he used it. And he does say he hopes that this book is far enough removed from the story of Carrie that no one will have a problem with that. And it is. I mean, it's apples and watermelons. Carrie, between Carrie and the Troop, but this is very good. He really develops the characters. Scoutmaster Tim probably the least developed of the troop, but the story is more about the kids anyway, I think. And the kids are very, very well developed. Kent, the son of the police chief, the alpha male of the troop. We get his backstory. We learn basically how he was raised, why he's the alpha male, aside from the fact that he's bigger than the other kids. It's all about how he was raised. Max, probably the most normal of the group. Ephraim has some anger issues, and we learn all about that. Newton, I really like his backstory, at least part about his mom, really nice. And then Shelley, kind of this sort of just blank slate. I mean, we get a lot of really interesting backstory about him. So, just as always, character is so important to me, and these are incredibly well-developed characters. And oh man, there's a part, it's one of the saddest things I've ever read, I think. One of those little interstitial things. I'm not going to say which one and give it away, but holy crap, it was so sad. It almost brought a tear to my eye. That's how sad it was. And that's good writing to me. If in the middle of this horror novel, I mean, yes, you're going to feel emotions, you're going to feel terror, and you're going to feel bad for the kids, but this is sort of this little piece to the puzzle that just really tore me up inside. It's horribly sad. Now, excuse me. So I like the way it's all put together. I like the characters. This is a very violent and gory book. Of course, I'm not going to say what specifically is going on, because you want to read the book itself to find out about that. As I was reading it, I kept thinking that this is a cross between Lord of the Flies and Cabin Fever. Not that what's happening here specifically is the same as what happened in Cabin Fever, but just that small group that's isolated with some sort of horrifying thing going on. And then after I finished, I read some of the blurbs on the book, and one person said it's a cross between Lord of the Flies and 28 Days Later. Someone else said a cross between Lord of the Flies and Night of the Creeps. So definitely Lord of the Flies in there. And then, again, depending on where you're coming from, these different horror movies. And I think there's validity to all of the comparisons. But yeah, definitely Lord of the Flies. I mean, you've got kids, these 14-year-old boys that are trapped on this island with all sorts of heavy shit going down. And you learn what they're really made of. And how each individual kid reacts to the shit that's happening. And I think with all the character development and the backstory that we get, I felt that their reactions and their actions seemed realistic. None of it really came out of left field. You didn't have Max or Ephraim suddenly doing something completely out of character just because of the situation they're in. They've been established, and it really follows what we've been told. Excuse me. So, as always, I don't want to get into specifics of the story. Spoilers, man. I don't want to spoil it for you. The whole point of this is to intrigue you, get you to pick this up and read it. And it's well worth reading. I'm going to give you my rating here. And this is really, really got to be the worst drawing that I've done. I debated on what to use for my rating. I thought about going with like a Boy Scout sash with the badges on it. I thought about going with something else that I'm not going to specify. And I quickly did away with that idea because I think it gives away too much of the story. So what I settled on, and there is a very specific reason for this. If you've read the book, you'll understand. If you haven't read the book yet, and you do after seeing this review, you will understand why I went with 4.5 stick figures, and they are not happy stick figures. So I give it 4.5 out of 5. Angry, sad stick figures. The reason I didn't give this 5 out of 5 is there were just a couple of things in the book. As I was reading, I came across a couple of things and immediately thought, of course that happened. And it could just be me, which is why I'm not going to say specifically what these things were. Maybe it's not going to have that effect on you. Excuse me. You know, maybe you won't care, maybe you won't even notice. Just a couple of things to me as I'm reading along. I'm really loving it, and then all of a sudden something, and I'm just like, of course that had to happen, because that's the type of book this is, and that's what happens in this type of book. I hate to say they were cliches, or I don't know if, or even tropes. I think it may just be from as much as I read, as much as I watch movies, you know, so many stories that it just, that's the way it hit me. Just a couple of little things, which is the only reason it gets 4.5 out of 5 instead of a complete 5. It wasn't perfect. And I don't even want to say it bothered me, because it is such a good book. It's so well written. The characters are so fantastic. It's violent and gory, and there's some great imagery. Nick Cutter's word usage is fantastic. I mean, I was hooked pretty early on when he described the moon as a fish hook in the sky. That hooked me, no pun intended. But again, just a couple of things where I was just like, of course it's that way, because it's a story, and that's what happens in stories. Excuse me. So, that aside, I highly recommend this. As does, oh look, Stephen King recommends it. So if you're not going to listen to me, listen to him. Come on. That's some good stuff. So that's it. The Troop by Nick Cutter. A novel of terror. Really horrible cover. Yeah. I'm just gonna... That is one of the most boring covers. I mean, I guess it's kind of representative, but just boring. I picked this up because I knew that Nick Cutter was just another name for an author I had read before, and I really enjoyed his work, so I picked it up. Certainly wasn't based on the cover. Anyway, pardon me, really. So that's it. My thoughts. I'm getting rambly again, as I tend to do, so that means it's time to cut this off. Pick it up. If I will have a link for the book in the description below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put them in the comments below. As always, the comments will be open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning before you spoil anything. I recently had somebody post a comment on one of my reviews and basically just gave away the twist ending to a book. There was no spoiler warning. If he'd had a warning, I would have left it up there, but I deleted it because I'm not here to tell you the entire story of the book. I'm here to guide you, hopefully intrigue you, get you to pick something up and read it. And just especially a book like the one in that review that had a huge, mind-blowing ending, for someone to just come on and say, this is the ending. Blah. That's kind of asshole-ish. And I deleted the comment, so hopefully not too many people saw it. If there'd been a spoiler warning, I would have left it up. So if you're going to spoil anything, if you want to talk about specifics, if you have any questions about specifics, spoiler warnings, people. We can talk about all you want in the comments below. Just post spoiler warnings. All right. So please like, share, and subscribe. And I'm Eric Smith for the Low Budget Review Show. Until next time, read more books.